Okay, so here are the 5 key benefits of ketamine therapy. These clips I'll be sending to potential clients to let them know the risks and benefits of ketamine therapy. So here are some of the benefits, the top 5 as I see it. The first big benefit right off the gate, it does seem to elevate mood. Basically what you have is a transcendent process. You take the ketamine pills, you swish them in your mouth, you put on your headphones, you put on your sleep mask, and you really go inward. You really rise above. That's kind of what they mean with the transcendent process. You're rising above your current situation, floating above, and you're noticing patterns, right? You're noticing what got you stuck, but more importantly, sort of notice a way out, right? You see your current situation as part of a big picture, which can be very healing, accepting what happened to you, what your struggles are, and noticing what's important to you. As part of the process, it can remind you of what used to help. So for part of depression is forgetting what used to be reinforcing, what used to work for you, what used to make you happy, used to make you find purpose. And so the ketamine can say, hey, remember a few months ago or a few years ago when you were, taking a jog each day, how much, better that felt? And so that could be a major aha, major insight. And so it can really quite quickly elevate a person's mood, reduce their anxiety, and that's kind of one of the main things people are looking for in therapy. The second main reason, it is anti-addictive. And they've done many studies, but one famous one, they took these people who were trying to quit drinking, trying to quit alcohol, which is a very, very difficult prospect. Their standard program, when they did this study, they took people who didn't have the ketamine therapy and they did their regular treatment, and after 6 months, there was a 27% success rate, right? So of 100 people, only 27 after 6 months were abstinent from alcohol. When they did the ketamine infusion, so when they did the experimental group and they added the ketamine therapy, at 6 months, the success rate was 75%. 75% of the participants were abstinent from drinking. And this is a huge deal. Addictions are one of those things that notoriously difficult to treat and resolve. And of course, you should note that as part of this program, the ketamine was really mixed in with the therapy. But when you do that, when you add it to the therapy program, it seems to boost resolving addictions. It just seems to dissociate you from those urges, and that lets a conversation happen, and it just makes it easier to find a different approach. Third reason, it can give a bird's eye view of your situation. It's almost a cliche, but a cop does something wrong, and the police department does an internal investigation, and they find no wrongdoing, surprise, surprise. Likewise, oftentimes we come in with an issue and our perspective of it is part of the pathology, right? It's part of this sort of culture of denial, right? There are certain things we need to admit to ourselves in order to really kind of break through. What the ketamine does is it really does 2 things. One, as I said before, you rise above your situation, you notice the patterns, and the second thing it does is it kind of takes away the ego. It just becomes easier to admit certain things. And this is crucial as a therapist because I can only work with what the person brings into therapy. A person 15 minutes a week can present almost anything. But with the ketamine, you kind of get to see their more realistic view, a more accurate situation that they're dealing with. So for both the therapist and the client, there just seems to be a better perspective that comes up. The fourth reason is it gives a mantra. The example that I use out in sub-Saharan Africa, out in the Serengeti, they have these hunter-gatherer tribes that go out and they hunt wildebeest. And oftentimes when they do it, they will bring a medicine man whose job is to take a bunch of sticks, throw them in the air, and wherever they land, kind of studies the sticks and says, the wildebeest herd is this way. And based on what that medicine man says, that's where they go. They head that direction. And the anthropologists who studied this group found that when they have that medicine man, they are about twice as effective at finding their herd and having their kill. And they couldn't figure out why. And when they realized that when they don't have the medicine man, there is a lot of debate, right? There is a lot of analysis. You have different people, different egos. And the truth is that it's just kind of difficult in any case to find out where the herd is. So having someone say, we're going this way, and just starting, just going into action is often the best thing to do, right? Now, if they're going in a certain direction and it turns out the herd is way over there, well, then it's easy for the medicine man to say, oh, well, the stick's actually, whatever, it meant this way. But they are out there, they are moving, they are starting. Sometimes what will happen, usually what will happen after a few ketamine sessions, is that there will be a mantra, a very simple, basic statement, but it has an intensity. It has a truth. Sometimes that mantra can be, connection is everything, right? Love is all there is, like a Beatles song, right? Sometimes it can be, just keep trying, right? Super simple, super basic, but it's as if the universe is telling you this. And it just makes it easier to just start. Whatever you're trying to do, to just start. So if the mantra is just keep trying, it becomes a lot easier, when you have a bad Tinder date, when you don't get that job at the interview. Just makes it easier to just sort of try again, right? And then as a therapist, my job is to help integrate that mantra, to help, occasionally remind the person about the trauma, the mantra. Process any issues, any trauma that are creating barriers towards fulfilling that mantra. Really focusing on the values that underscore whatever that mantra is. What does it mean to have this focus, this direction in your life? But in general, a lot of issues we tend to overthink, we tend to want to wait. I can't tell you how many times people come in, first I need to stop my depression and anxiety, and then I can live my life. Where in reality, it's kind of the opposite. You kind of got to live your life. That gives you some confidence, and that can help with the depression and the anxiety. Fifth reason, it just seems to build a stronger therapeutic bond. I've worked with many therapists throughout my graduate program. They generally encourage any therapist in training to see therapists because one, a lot of issues come up during the training process, and two, it's kind of good to have a perspective on the other side of the couch, right? And they want to expose you to a bunch of different therapists, a bunch of different modalities, see if something really resonates with you. And so I've worked with some really good therapists, some really, well-trained therapists, and have seen some work. But my first psychedelic session as a participant was with this pastor that didn't get a lot of clinical training, just sort of asks a few simple, basic questions during the process. But I have to say that I feel a stronger connection, a stronger bond to this day with that guy than many of the other very well-trained therapists. I feel like I've just gotten so much more from that one session. And to this day, I still I think about from time to time, how the guy's doing, what's going on. There's just something very bonding about having somebody there who witnesses you have a major revelation about your life. And as a therapist, I have to say that I've worked with some people for a year or two without the ketamine therapy, And I've worked with some people where just maybe a dozen sessions, and there were, in those sessions, maybe a ketamine session or two. And sometimes I do feel as a therapist a greater bond with those individuals who've had a few sessions but had the ketamine therapy, because there's just something about being there to witness a person have this major aha, and afterwards the sessions, there just seems to be kind of a lightness to it, a greater sense of camaraderie, and that is incredibly, incredibly important. They did, they did a few decades ago, they did this study from Consumer Reports, which is this organization that they review everything. They review televisions, dishwashers, cars, you name it. And they decided to review therapy. They decided to figure out once and for all what makes successful therapy. Is it a particular type, CBT, psychodynamic? Is it the age of the therapist, right? Is it what variables make good therapy? And they found, by doing all this analysis, that it's not necessarily the type of therapy. It's not necessarily the age of the therapist, the experience level, which is kind of depressing, right? Sometimes a therapist who's had decades of experience is not that much better in terms of clinical outcomes than a person who's just been a therapist for a few years. But what they found, that the one big factor that seems to predict therapeutic success is the quality of the therapeutic relationship, the level of kind of therapeutic camaraderie, the sense of working together between the therapist and the client. That seems to be the biggest predictor. So when people are interested in therapy and they say, which therapy, I always say, go for the therapist you have the strongest bond with. In fact, they called this the dodo bird effect, because from Alice in Wonderland, that saying that everyone's a winner, everyone gets a prize, all the different therapies seem to work pretty well if the therapeutic relationship. And wouldn't you know it, one of the things that happens with a good ketamine therapy session, a good psychedelic session, is that greatly enhanced therapeutic relationship. That much greater sense of bond that just seems to occur. So to review all of this, I'll be honest, I used to think that ketamine therapy was almost like a consolation prize. Most therapists that I knew who were interested in psychedelic therapy were just kind of waiting for psilocybin, they were waiting for MDMA. But I found that the ketamine therapy can bring about much of the same growth, especially because you can adjust the amount of ketamine, the route of administration. And many people have reported that it's not as scary as psilocybin. It's not as scary as magic mushrooms. The analogy is that when you're taking magic mushrooms, it is like you are scuba gear in the water, in the deep water. You are down there. Ketamine is more like you're snorkeling. You're right under the surface. You're definitely not dry, but you can just lift your head up and you're out in the open. It just doesn't seem as scary. It doesn't seem as intimidating. With ketamine, you can listen to a song, experience something, and then there'll be a different song and you'll have a different viewpoint of it. So anything that's scary or difficult, you just sort of wait for the song to end. Then you get a new song, a new perspective. Oftentimes, if it gets just too intense, you open up your sleep mask and you orient yourself, you ground yourself, and you go back in. And it can be a very good experience. The vast majority of my clients who have started the ketamine therapy have chosen to complete it. And many have said that they are really astonished at the level of growth and the level of connection after the 6 to 8 sessions. So those are, I would say, the 5 key top benefits of ketamine therapy. Now, in fairness, in our next clip, we will have the 5 key reasons ketamine therapy might not be right for you. Thank you.